thank you to all of us for joining us today. So I'm Konrad Feldman, and CEO at Quantcast, and our mission is to radically simplify advertising on the open internet. Today, we work with thousands of brands and publishers worldwide to help them better understand and engage their audiences online and empower those audiences to make more informed privacy choices. Today, our industry sits at a crossroads, and right now the future can appear far less certain than it was just a year ago. And there are three major themes that are already emerging, and I think you're going to see to continue to emerge over the next year. That will be the sort of the origin and focus of countless news articles and many debates across the industry. And these three are identifying consumers in a world without cookies, the importance of first-party data, and also consumer consent, and in particular, the consumer's role in the open internet economy. Now, I'm going to touch on all three of these and outline how I think they'll impact our ability to thrive as an industry and the potential pitfalls ahead of us. But before we talk about the future, I want to briefly look back at how we got to where we are today. So the internet democratized content distribution. For the first time in history, certainly anyone with a phone line and a computer, could create content, distribute it to the world, and find new audiences. And for those audiences, all of us, this incredible new medium opened up a world of possibilities, a truly open internet. And today, 5 billion people around the world rely on the internet for information, communication, entertainment, and so much more. But in those earliest days, an insidious myth emerged. And in many ways, this is the internet's original sin. And that was allowing everyone to believe that the internet is free. That's right. We let the world believe that all the diverse, vibrant content available to all of us, wherever and whenever we want it, has no cost. Of course, the truth is that good content is often a labor of love. It's a product of the metaphorical and, frequently quite literal blood, sweat, and tears of creators, journalists, storytellers, and more. Now, of course, the economic model that funds all of this content, because that content isn't free, is advertising. And on the face of it, life is good. Digital advertising has gone from strength to strength. Even in 2020, with all the challenges we have faced, digital advertising has been projected to grow globally to, in fact, I think this number has been recently updated to, a third of a trillion dollars. Okay, that's a big number. When you get up to 330, 340 billion dollars, it's sort of, the numbers start to lose some context. But to give you some perspective, the US digital advertising market is bigger than the gross domestic product of more than 2/3 of the world's countries. So if advertising is the primary source of funding for the content and the services we all rely on, so this is the global number. The US is about 135 billion, which is enormous, 2/3 of the world's countries, right? Then what is the problem if we've got all that money to pay for the content that we all consume for free? Well, power is the problem. For all the growth in digital advertising that we've seen now for years, most of the benefit accrues to just two companies. Now, they've built effective services that we all use every day. They draw a large, engaged global audience, and they've also removed a lot of the friction when it comes to separating marketers from their budgets. You see, the same diversity that makes the open internet such an awesome power for content distribution and for consumer choice also leads to huge complexity and inefficiency in reaching audiences consistently across this fragmented, diverse environment. So with that comes greater friction for marketers who are seeking returns from their investments. And where before there was chaos and confusion, a small number of now very large companies created a sense of order, a seemingly safe, predictable environment where brands can easily spend their budgets. And this sense of predictability and control delivered these companies huge success and financial reward, and the vast majority of all new budget that is spent on digital advertising. Yet these companies don't account for the vast majority of time that we all spend online, nor do they account for the vast majority of the original content that we get to enjoy online. That content that creators, journalists, and storytellers have slaved over to produce. So what? So what if a few successful companies have cracked the code and become rich along the way? What if the little guys, the independent content creators, the local newspapers, and so on have suffered? Bad luck. Things change, right? Well, the problem with that way of thinking is that we're cheating our future selves. Outside the artificially curated worlds of the walled gardens, the environment is getting more hostile for content producers. The dominant platforms have a vice-like grip over a publisher's ability to access and create value from their audiences, and that vice is tightening. It's tough for independent publishers, and it's becoming harder for new voices to emerge. A less vibrant open internet favors the giant corporations. One clear loser already has been the local news outlets, which provide the essential last mile of information about the world around us. Our children won't thank us for handing them this world. They won't thank us for reducing the diversity of trustworthy sources of news and information. They won't thank us for concentrating the power over that information into the hands of a small number of large, powerful corporations. Just as biodiversity is a sign of a healthy natural environment, a diverse open internet is a sign of a healthy society. And if we don't act, we risk handing our children an intellectual crisis in addition to an environmental one. Investing in the open internet by directing more advertising budgets to a wider diversity of publishers should be a no-brainer. This is not simply some benevolent charitable effort. It is in a brand's best interest to maintain a broad range of options for reaching their target audiences where those audiences are engaged and want to spend their time. And it's these audiences that are at the very heart of the open internet. They're more diverse, richer, and more genuine than under the social spotlight of the walled gardens. Unfortunately, until now, reliably reaching a target audience across the highly fragmented world of the open internet has been so much harder than doing so inside of the walled gardens. The advertising technology industry was born to solve this problem, but it's also contributed to the confusion by creating a messy patchwork of vendors with competing claims that brands have struggled to unpick and tie back to genuine business results. And the often opaque mix of companies has fostered wider distrust among consumers into the role of online advertising. Despite all of this, advertising technology underpins the financial viability of virtually every site that you rely on today. And this technology is facing its biggest ever challenge. So the last 2 years have seen the beginnings of change. First, the introduction of GDPR in Europe in May of 2018. This signaled a future in which every part of the internet ecosystem will require clear consent from consumers to use their data. Whether that use of data is for measurement, personalization, or advertising. Similar regulations have followed around the world. There are new regulations being introduced in Brazil, in Thailand, in Canada. We have CCPA here in California, and there will be many more multi-letter acronyms to undoubtedly come. Hopefully in the next administration, we'll also see federal privacy legislation to save us all having to deal with separate state level legislation. But there is more regulation coming, not less. And with that regulation, we see new burden. Quantcast complying with GDPR and meeting those requirements, that aligned with our privacy by design approach. But also, as we became familiar with the compliance burden that our publisher and marketer clients had to deal with, we created Quantcast Choice. So Quantcast Choice is a consent management solution to help brands and publishers easily obtain the consent that they and their partners need to operate under regulations such as GDPR and CCPA. Of course, we are furthest ahead globally today in terms of regulations affecting consent in Europe, with GDPR now been in place for 2.5 years. And today, Quantcast Choice enables more of the consented programmatic advertising in Europe than any other solution. But the changes required to address GDPR and other privacy laws are simply the warm-up act. A post-cookie world is a significantly bigger challenge. You see, data protection regulators aren't the only ones who can penalize or shut down companies that don't play by their rules. The browsers wield arguably greater power as internet gatekeepers. While new laws typically take years to implement, browsers like Apple's Safari have introduced new restrictions suddenly and with limited or no opportunity for industry feedback. The same companies whose browsers dictate how advertising on the open internet can be delivered and measured, and ultimately how content can be funded, also happen to operate large media and advertising businesses of their own. They benefit when the open internet is harder to buy for brands. More ad budgets flow to them, even if it means less money to fund the original content and services that 5 billion people around the world online enjoy without having to pay for subscriptions. This is why the demise of the third-party cookie is concentrating the minds of the industry. The third-party cookie has been the essential thread which connects our larger ecosystem today and allows us to understand and manage behaviors and exposures over time. From audience research to managing frequency and campaign measurement, most of the solutions that underpin the open internet economy today rely on third-party cookies, and they use them as an identifier that enables consistent comparison and analysis over time and across sites. The third-party cookie has actually been in decline for some time. It's already largely gone from Apple's Safari browser. And the impact of changes like this have huge ramifications for publishers, for the internet, and therefore for society at large. Today, Safari users are already generally far less valuable to publishers than visitors from other browsers. Consumers who are using other browsers are subsidizing internet content for Safari users already. So luckily for publishers, Safari represented the minority of internet users. Google's Chrome browser is king. And of course, in January this year, Google announced that they would remove the third-party cookie from Chrome in 2022. With its larger market share, this will create a much bigger hole to be filled in the internet economy's funding. So seismic changes are afoot. The future of the open internet is at stake, and we are entering a period of intense invention and reinvention. Specifically, identity, first-party data, and consent will all take on new importance and urgency. Now, not just as nice to have, but as central, fundamental pillars of a sustainable open internet economy. So the first of our three major trends, identifying consumers in a world without cookies. For the internet economy to continue to thrive, alternative identifiers to the third-party cookie will be essential. Precisely what these identifiers will look like is unknown at this stage. There are lots of suggestions and ideas. There are many companies, including ourselves, that are working on solutions. There are also many companies, including ourselves again, working on industry-wide efforts. But we still lack complete clarity from the browsers in terms of what's going to be, what will actually be able to operate in the new environment. So there's a lot of work to be done. And whether or not you believe that the browser should have the power to decide the fate of the open internet economy, they will certainly have a heavy influence on its future. The ultimate picture will only come into focus when we gain greater clarity from the browsers who are dictating the rules. One thing that we can be fairly sure of is that the most scalable identity solutions will use a combination of ways to recognize audiences over time and between sites. The easiest way to determine if a particular internet user is a relevant prospect for your brand or campaign, or have a way to identify them and understand their behavior over time, or frequency cap and so on, is to have a specific identifier that is tied to that individual provided by the consumer. Identifiers that provide this type of precision are referred to as being deterministic. So email addresses are a classic example, and they allow consumer behavior to be understood across browsers and devices over time and are immune from things like cookie deletion. This makes deterministic identifiers very valuable in delivering advertising and in measuring its impact. As publishers and marketers increasingly recognize the importance of deterministic identifiers, expect to see more and more registration rules on your favorite sites. The problem is that registration rules generally aren't hugely successful at capturing registration data, And consumers are already tired, especially if you go to somewhere like Europe, increasingly tired of being repeatedly asked for consent. This is the reason why we recently introduced a new solution. So building on the success of Quantcast Choice, we recently launched Permissio, our new privacy preferences portal. So, if before all of our travel was locked down, any of you that spent time in Europe, you will have seen a lot of interstitials and pop-ups asking for consent. That can be annoying. And we know it because we're responsible for the largest number of those requests for consent. So Permissio provides consumers with the ability to easily save their privacy preferences. And so, new privacy regulation is providing consumers with more controls. It's also increasing the number of annoying pop-ups and requests that they receive. So Permissio gives consumers the power to customize and apply their privacy settings across all their favorite websites in one place. To do this, consumers create an account. They're creating a deterministic login. This allows their consent preferences to be recognized and respected across a variety of sites, which brings back a more enjoyable browsing experience for them. It also, when the browsing experience is improved for consumers, it's better for publishers. There are lower bounce rates, therefore they can generate more revenue. But this also helps publishers build a deeper relationship with their audience and start to capture deterministic identity data. And this is sort of part of our journey towards what we believe will be a future where deterministic IDs are part of a consented first-party environment. So deterministic data is great, but even with new solutions, you will only ever have deterministic data for a fraction of the total online audience. So how do you fill in the gaps? Well, the next best thing for determining for sure that you're reaching the right audience is to know with a high degree of confidence that you're probably reaching the right audience. So mechanisms that enable us to do this are called probabilistic identifiers, and they use statistical analysis to estimate that a set of activities likely relates to the same user or audience. Not even the walled gardens, with their clear scale advantages, are able to rely on deterministic data alone. They also make extensive use of probabilistic identifiers in many of their advertising solutions. Probabilistic is not perfect, but with enough reliable data and sufficiently sophisticated modeling, it can actually be incredibly effective at understanding audiences. So effective that we've been able to power one of our core products, Quantcast Measure, using probabilistic data for more than a decade. Today, with insights from more than 100 million internet destinations, Quantcast Measure is the largest probabilistic model of the open internet and creates considerable value for the publishers and marketers who use it to better understand their audiences, curate content, and engage in advertising transactions. Any identifier needs data associated with it to be useful. And this brings us to our second theme, the importance of first-party data. Much of the growth in programmatic advertising has been based on the use of so-called third-party data, often sold by data brokers and bought by brands to help with their campaigns. So third-party data is data that has been captured and classified by someone other than yourself, the third party. I think many people appreciate that third-party data can be unreliable. It's often old and inconsistent, and increasing privacy legislation and browser actions are only going to exacerbate these problems. And more companies are reading the tea leaves. So Oracle, who operates Oracle Data Cloud, which is probably the largest third-party data broker in the world, actually stopped offering its third-party data in Europe this past September. The truth is, first-party data that is directly collected by your organization and is subsequently used by you for measurement and decision-making, has always been superior to third-party data. It's fresher, it's more accurate, it's more trustworthy. And first-party data is going to be a critical ingredient in tomorrow's open internet economy. Now, I recognize different businesses have different amounts of first-party data, and the opportunity for you to work with others that also have reliable first-party data is one way that you can tackle a lack of your own. But I think the best combinations are going to combine your own first-party data and other data that the entity that is using with you has collected themselves and therefore understands its provenance and therefore its trustworthiness. Let's talk about the last of the three core elements to future-proofing your business: consumer consent and the consumer's role in the open internet economy. So consumer consent is not a new concept for many of you. if you're dealing with CCPA, especially if you have audiences and operations in Europe. But still today, the majority of sites don't have consent management solutions and are actually on the wrong side of GDPR. This is going to change as enforcement ramps up and as there is more active scrutiny of consent in all internet transactions. You see, it's not just about that you're capturing consent yourself. Consent needs to be propagated and managed through the ecosystem, and you need to be confident that every step of the way in your supply chain, consent is being recognized. And economic carrots typically get a faster response than regulatory sticks. When we start to see publisher monetization abruptly drop, or an advertiser's retargeting just stop working, we are going to see a big uptick in the adoption of consent management solutions. And I think as the major infrastructure places such as exchanges start to enforce consent, which is coming early next year, we're going to see rapid adoption of consent management solutions to ensure that sort of the basic operations of publisher monetization and advertiser campaigns continues to operate. So this means businesses are going to have to explain to consumers what data they need and why, and ask for consent. They're going to have to allow consumers to change their minds. We know consumers value free content, and we know that society benefits greatly from it. It is also likely that most consumers don't fully appreciate that all of that free content they enjoy is largely funded by advertising, and the currency for advertising is audience data. So while it might be uncomfortable, perhaps this is the time for us to confront the original sin and start to have an honest conversation with our audiences and with consumers. Regardless of what the future holds, we cannot take the open internet for granted, and it is worth fighting for. There's a lot of work to be done in our near future, but when that work will lead to a healthy and sustainable, diverse and equitable open internet, it's work that it's worth us all doing together. I'd like to share with you just briefly one example of how we're working towards that by enabling brands and publishers to combine their own first-party data with Quantcast first-party data to create intuitive and efficient, future-proofed audience solutions for the open internet. We call this particular solution Audience Planner, and my colleague Dave will provide a brief demonstration.
Hey everyone, my name is Dave Burke and I'm the lead product manager for Quantcast Audience Planner. Today I'm going to give you a quick walkthrough on how the product works and highlight some of the ways you can tap into our real-time data set to make smarter marketing decisions. First, I'll start by creating a new audience. Right now I'm looking at the United States, but this planning tool is global and covers almost every country in the world. You can also select a date range if you want to look back at a specific point in time, but for now I'll just look at the last 30 days. Once on the main report page, I have all my audience building tools on the left, such as location, demographics, interests, keywords, and devices. And then across the top, I have my audience size, as well as all of the different reports I can get, which I'll dig into momentarily. For this example, let's dig into an interest near and dear to my heart, video games. Unsurprisingly, you see a heavy skew towards younger age groups and primarily men. While this might seem obvious, one of the ways that people use our tool today is to dig into new cohorts of customers to expand their customer base. For example, while men over-index for this video game audience, it's still made up of 42% women, which is a huge opportunity for marketing. So if we want to learn more about the 42% of women interested in video games, we can simply select female as a filter, and now we're looking at only the women who are interested in video games. When we do that, we see a fairly consistent outline of demographics, but you can also dig into other reports to dig deeper into this audience. For example, browsing interests will give you the top interests across 160 pre-curated content categories. Again, as you probably expect, we see a high correlation to technology and computing content. And if you dig further into that, you'll see video games as the highest indexing subcategory, but also a high affinity for computers and mobile devices. On that note, you can also get a breakout of device and by location. But let's say you wanted to dig deeper than just video games. This is where keywords come in. You can use our keyword cloud to give you a view of the specific topics within video games that this audience is reading about across the web. So you see a variety of topics from PlayStation to Xbox to Nintendo, some games like Call of Duty and Zelda, and even some studios like Ubisoft and Activision. Now let's say we want to dig into some of these specific topics directly, for example, next-gen consoles. Going back to create a new audience, I can start with keywords now, and for this example, I'll hone in on the new Xbox Series X and exclude people reading about the PlayStation 5. Then once I've added my keywords, I'll change my date range to look at just the 2 days before the launch of the Xbox pre-orders, which was September 22nd. Now if I look at the keyword cloud, I'll see a lot more content relating to Xbox specifically, such as pre-orders and their streaming service Game Pass, which is also available on Android devices. They also announced on the 21st they were acquiring Bethesda Game Studios, so you can see topics like Bethesda, acquisition, and titles of their game franchises such as Elder Scrolls, Fallout, and Doom, all of which I've personally put in more hours playing than I'd be willing to admit. That's all for now, but if this looks like something that'd help you and your teams pull strategic insights quickly and make smarter marketing decisions, please reach out to us to learn more. Thanks, everyone.
I hope that glimpse into Audience Planner provides you with some optimism for the future. As the world slowly rebounds from the COVID pandemic, digital media and advertising are going to play a leading role in the recovery. The road ahead will undoubtedly have some unexpected turns, but it can, and I believe it will, lead to a brighter future. To summarize, change is coming, and successful digital publishers and marketers are going to have to change. They're going to require new solutions to identify consumers in a world without cookies, to better leverage first-party data, and also to engage consumers in their role in the internet economy, and to ensure that they're capturing and propagating valid consent. When we can combine these solutions with easy-to-use media solutions for planning, activation, and measurement, then the open internet can start to offer advertisers the same benefits of scale, performance, simplicity, and trust as the walled gardens. When we do this, publishers will capture a fairer share of the advertising spend to fund the rich and diverse content that we all enjoy. That is the opportunity that's ahead of us, and it's something we should all care about. This vision requires that every publisher, every marketer, and the technology companies that support them work together to make it a reality. We're excited to partner with all of you in building a Rebel Alliance for the open internet. So, we would love to hear from you and how we can partner together in terms of doing this. Please know you can always reach out to me at kfeldman@Quantcast.